I was standing on a public sidewalk, the kind everyone walks on without thinking twice. No barriers. No signs. No crime. Just open concrete under my feet and a camera in my hand. Yet somehow, in that ordinary moment, I became a problem. Not because of what I was doing, but because of who I was and how visible I chose to be. Power doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it shows up disguised as authority, wearing a uniform, backed by confidence it never earned. One moment I was ignored like any other passerby. The next, eyes were on me, tension thick in the air, whispers spreading faster than facts. A place built to sell comfort suddenly felt hostile, like I didn't belong there at all. I knew my rights. I knew the law. But knowing something and being allowed to live it are two very different things. The sidewalk hadn't changed. The rules hadn't changed. Only the way I was being treated had. And in America, that difference can be dangerous. What makes this worse is how normal it felt to them. How easy it was to escalate. How quickly a simple presence turned into suspicion, then into enforcement, then into a phone call meant to silence me. All over a space that was never theirs to control. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about rules. It was about comfort, power, and who gets questioned for simply existing in public. But what happened next revealed something far bigger than one sidewalk. And the moment the police were called, everything changed. Before that moment, my life was simple in the way most people take for granted. I spent my days working, creating content, walking city streets like anyone else trying to exist without trouble. Filming in public wasn't new to me. It was something I had done many times before, standing on sidewalks, capturing everyday scenes, documenting what most people pass without noticing. I followed the law carefully, because experience had taught me that even doing things right doesn't always protect you. That day felt no different. The city moved around me like it always did. Cars rolled past. Shoppers came and went. People checked their phones, hurried to their destinations, laughed, complained, lived their lives. I was just another face in the crowd, another body on a stretch of public concrete that belonged to everyone. At least, that's what it was supposed to be. But there's an invisible line some people believe they own. A boundary that isn't written on signs or marked on the ground. And once you cross it, especially if you look like me, normal turns into tension fast. I could feel it building in small ways. The glances that lingered too long. The sudden interest in what I was doing. The quiet discomfort that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with control. I had been here before. Same place. Same sidewalk. Same assumption that authority could be claimed just by saying it out loud. I hoped things had changed. I hoped lessons had been learned. But hope doesn't stop patterns. And as attention shifted toward me, I could sense the situation tightening, like a storm forming without warning. I didn't know it yet, but the calm was already gone, and what came next would expose just how fragile public really is when power feels threatened. The tension didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through body language, through movement that felt intentional instead of random. People who had nothing to do with me suddenly did. Eyes tracked me as if I had crossed an invisible line no one warned me about. The sidewalk stayed the same, but the energy shifted. What had been casual turned tight, like the air before a storm. I stayed where I was, grounded by the fact that I hadn't done anything wrong. Still, the pressure grew. Someone disappeared inside the building, not in a hurry, but with purpose. That was when I knew the situation had taken a turn. There's a certain look people get when they believe they're about to summon authority, when they think power is only a phone call away. Moments later, it became obvious that the decision had already been made about me. Not based on behavior. Not based on facts. Just perception. I was no longer a person on a public sidewalk. I was being treated like a disturbance, an inconvenience that needed to be removed. What made it harder to swallow was the hypocrisy all around me. Cameras sat mounted on walls and poles, silently recording everyone who passed by. Banks, storefronts, parking lots, surveillance everywhere, unquestioned and accepted. But the moment I held a camera, doing the same thing in plain sight, it became a threat. Not because it was illegal, but because it flipped the script. I could feel the weight of that imbalance pressing down. This wasn't about rules. It was about who was allowed to observe and who was expected to stay invisible. The sidewalk was public, but the power dynamic made it feel privately enforced. Then came the escalation. The quiet decision to involve the police. That choice carried a different kind of fear, one that sits deep in the chest. Because once law enforcement enters the picture, things can spiral fast, especially when the narrative has already been shaped without your voice. I knew how these situations could end. I had seen it too many times. A harmless moment reframed as suspicious. A lawful action rebranded as disorder. I stayed calm, but my mind raced. I thought about how quickly misunderstandings turn into confrontations. How easily a simple presence becomes a problem when authority feels challenged. Around me, people kept moving, mostly unaware that something serious was unfolding just feet away. To them, it was background noise. To me, it was everything. Time stretched. Every passing second felt heavier than the last. I wondered what had been said behind closed doors. I wondered how I was being described. And I wondered whether the truth would even matter once the police arrived. Because in moments like this, reality doesn't always win. Perception does. And as the sound of approaching sirens crept closer, I realized the next few minutes would determine whether this stayed a lesson, or became something far worse. The moment the police arrived, everything felt heavier. Not louder, not chaotic, just heavier, like the weight of consequences had finally stepped onto the sidewalk. A patrol car rolled to a stop, lights flashing softly, drawing attention from people who hadn't cared just minutes earlier. Suddenly, everyone noticed. This wasn't invisible anymore. I stood still, aware that every movement could be misread. My heart beat harder, not because I was guilty, but because I understood how fragile innocence can be once authority gets involved. I had followed the law perfectly, yet I was the one being treated like a problem that needed to be managed. The narrative had already been written without me. All I could do now was exist inside it. The officer listened. Not just to me, but to the situation itself. The tension hung between us, thick and uncertain. This was the turning point, the moment where truth either breaks through or gets buried under assumptions. I thought about how many people never get this pause, never get the chance to be heard. How often these encounters end differently, quietly, without cameras or witnesses. Time slowed. The sidewalk felt smaller, boxed in by expectations and fear. I could sense the discomfort shifting, moving away from me and toward the realization that nothing illegal had ever happened. That the call had been made out of control, not concern. Out of discomfort, not danger. And then it happened, the imbalance cracked. The facts stood firm. The public space remained public. The authority that had been summoned found no crime, no threat, no reason for escalation. In that instant, the power dynamic flipped. Not dramatically, not loudly, but undeniably. Relief washed over me, but it was tangled with something darker. Because surviving a moment like this doesn't erase the reality behind it. It doesn't undo the fear, or the knowledge that the outcome could have been very different. That safety depended on discretion, not justice. As the situation began to unwind, I realized this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a rare interruption in a pattern that continues every day. But the question remained, what happens after the uniforms leave, and the system that allowed this moment stays exactly the same? When it was finally over, the sidewalk returned to what it had always been. Just concrete, just space, just a place people pass through without thinking. The police left. The tension faded. The crowd moved on. On the surface, everything looked normal again. But I didn't walk away unchanged. Moments like that don't disappear just because they end peacefully. They stay with you, settling into your thoughts, reminding you how quickly ordinary life can turn into a test of survival and restraint. What struck me most wasn't the confrontation itself, but how easily it happened. How quickly comfort turned into control. How fast authority was summoned without understanding, without conversation, without respect. All it took was discomfort, someone deciding that my presence didn't belong, even in a space that belonged to everyone. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a system where public spaces aren't always truly public, where rights exist on paper but are enforced unevenly in real life. For many people who look like me, encounters like this are not rare interruptions, they're expected risks. And while this one ended calmly, too many others don't. Too many stories end without relief, without accountability, without justice. Sharing this experience isn't about proving a point or winning an argument. It's about exposing a reality that often goes unnoticed unless it's captured, questioned, and challenged. Silence allows these moments to repeat. Visibility forces them into the open. So the next time you see someone questioned for simply existing, ask yourself why. Ask who benefits from that suspicion, and who pays the price. Because change doesn't start with authority. It starts when ordinary people refuse to accept unfairness as normal. The sidewalk was public that day. The law was clear. The outcome was calm. But the truth remains uncomfortable. And the real question is this: how many people never get to walk away and tell their story?